as I think about a place like MassHousing, we are who came before us. And as I look around the room and see Howard back there and Ned, Eleanor's here, Bob Pine. My vision isn't what it used to be, so I apologize for it's wonderful to see you all here. This is a place that you all built, we all built together. And today is really a day to honor that contribution, honor that accomplishment, honor that innovative spirit that our chairman talked about.
I think the three greatest challenges when I was there were first, financing the projects. For some years prior to my arrival and the arrival of John Eller, the executive director, the bond market had been weak throughout the nation. It wasn't MassHousing's fault. But finally, so MassHousing was financing projects with short-term money, which is a dangerous thing to do. And also there was a legal limit on how long you could do it. So, but finally, I think it was 1970, it was in 1978, I think, the agency sold for the first time in many years a major bond issue of $100 million, and the issue was rated A+ by Standard & Poor's, which was the highest possible rating then available to housing agencies such as MassHousing. So that was a major accomplishment dealing with what had been a very tough situation. And related to that is that because of MassHousing's kind of weak financial situation, the agency had been unable for some years to get HUD's Section 8 money, another severe limitation on the program. But those obstacles were overcome that year. I think the second major issue for me was the general workload. It became very, very heavy. The number of new projects coming in, applications for mortgage loans became very big. And at every board meeting there would be one or two or three or four projects that had to be explained and to the board, and they nearly always voted approval. I don't think they ever voted one down permanently. They might have asked a question, so you have to bring it back the next month. But the workload was big. But
I was a lucky guy when I was asked to become executive director. This was a time in the 1980s, this was after a 25-year career at HUD, in which the federal government was involved in a term that was the buzzword of the day, devolution. We will devolve, said the federal government across the board, we will devolve authority to carry out what were normal programs to the states and localities. Our ability to deal with a mega symbol of public housing failure at the time, Columbia Point. And the agency had the ability, the resources, the commitment to revitalize Columbia Point, recreate it into Harbor Point. And although Joe Corcoran has already written a book, I'm going to write the real book, Harbor Point.
I firmly believed, in my previous career, in politics in particular and other things, that government agencies shouldn't promise what they couldn't deliver. And they shouldn't deliver what they couldn't afford. And they shouldn't fail to consult intelligently and honestly the people that we were intended to serve. I thought the agency needed a strategic plan, and when we did that, and that pointed out some challenges, and we kind of followed the plan, and then the other two that are better known are the SHARP program and Demo Dispo. And just to illustrate about Demo Dispo was a remarkable, complex, and difficult challenge of working on behalf of HUD, but more importantly on behalf of thousands of people, men, women, and children, who were living in some financed housing. It wasn't public housing, but it might as well have been in many ways. And then working through a long process of a resident-centered redevelopment that was successful. And independence of this agency allows the creativity and the innovation and the flexibility that a state agency cannot.
We're talking about 50 years of MassHousing, but it's really 50 years of you. It's 50 years of us. It's 50 years of amazing accomplishments that all of you and all of the people that came before you have worked to put in place. And I do think we've set a great foundation over the first 50 years, but it'll be interesting to see what gets built over the next 10 and 20 and 50 more years to come. So as I look back on my time here, we've had two amazing kind of societal events that took place during this 15-year period. It was, the first attack on American soil on the continental United States, of people trying to attack us, and the Great Recession. As we were recovering from 9/11, we hit not only a huge financial market meltdown, but a real estate market meltdown as well. And in the middle of that, it was very clear that more and more people than ever needed help to afford a place to live.
In my opinion, the biggest innovation which happened and was created by our staff was the introduction of computers. We had typewriters and pens and pencils and erasers and paper, but things take a long time to figure out when that's what you're working with.
In terms of what we were proud of in our time, it was, I would say, the focus on the inner city issues and beginning the comprehensive revitalization of the properties, the creation of an organization within MHFA called the Inner City Task Force that Eleanor chaired, in which we brought everybody involved in the rehabilitation of these neighborhoods into the agency. Secondly, showing that distressed public housing could be renovated in a visit by Secretary Cisneros, HUD Secretary Cisneros. He called Harbor Point the innovation that created Hope 6. One program we brought over from HUD was the TAP program, the whole community services idea under Tony Flaherty of blessed memory, and the focus on helping minority businesses and minority employment increase dramatically.
The innovations, the top three I've got to mention very quickly. There were many. One I will mention is the Tenancy Preservation Program that came out of Community Services, Ann Anderson, I think in particular. And while I was here, we introduced it to the western part of the state. And I went out there with then Judge Abrashkin of the Housing Court and the DMH agencies and the DMR agencies and others to begin to fund something that would preserve tenancies for people with special needs and issues, if they could be preserved, and if not, to find a suitable other form of housing so they wouldn't be disruptive where they were living. The other two that were the biggest during my tenure were clearly Sharp and Demo Dispo, as I mentioned. And I won't, I could talk for a long time about Sharp. It was an interesting challenge, one that we really felt seriously threatened the financial viability of the agency. But we wanted to preserve the housing. We wanted to do the right thing. Not the last, and certainly not least. In many ways, the most was Demo Dispo. And I was sort of in the middle of that with Marvin's initiating many things and Tom completing it. I think by the time I left, in those 6 years, we had completed construction on about 7 of the 10 developments. And the goals were incredibly complex, incredibly ambitious. The innovations there were many. I think in architecture, in financing, in community oversight. For the rest of my life, I will be grateful for the people that I had a chance to work with in the community.
So here's what I think was our greatest innovation. It was this program called MI Plus. We figured if we can save 8% of the mortgages that get MI Plus, it will be financially neutral to the agency. So we're now 13 years later. We're saving 85% of the mortgages where people access MI Plus and stay in their homes instead of getting it foreclosed upon. And I think that's an amazing accomplishment. We're the only program of its kind in the country now, over a decade later. We've kept over 1,000 people in their home that we would have otherwise foreclosed on. That was an amazing innovation in the marketplace. We started using our balance sheet to support affordable housing in a way that we had never done before. During this period of time, we spent $275 million of our own reserves. $275 million for an agency that was founded with a $300,000 loan. This past year, the agency upped its ante by throwing another $160 million into an opportunity fund. So we're almost at $500 million of spending off of our own balance sheet to support affordable housing in the state. We stayed in the market during the Great Recession when banks and other housing finance agencies completely went out of the market. We were in the market every day, multifamily and single family, and that led to our biggest lending year ever. The first time we ever went over $1 billion. We have the lowest foreclosure rates in our homeownership program, or delinquency rates, even more appropriate, in our homeownership program and in our rental program of any entity around. The delinquency rate in Massachusetts in our portfolio is 1/3 of the FHA delinquency rate in this state. We have 3 multifamily loans that are delinquent. 3. You know some of the risks that we take on the mortgages that we make. To only have 3 of them delinquent is a remarkable acknowledgement of the work that all of you do to make these loans sustainable and not just affordable. We can get lost in billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of units that we do, but I think what you've got to remember is this thing called affordable housing. You do one family at a time, one person at a time, and one life at a time. That's how you create lasting change in the work that we do. And I think if we keep that in mind as we go into the future, there's nothing that MassHousing won't be able to withstand.